bin schon alt und greis und grau. Die Räder drehen sich, die Ohren gehen sich. Ich bin schon alt und greis und grau. Es ist Tag verhangen, ich tu mir der Monden. Ich hab wohl gehabt, a Stickel Glück. Die Räder drehen sich, die Ohren gehen sich, kein Entfer ist nicht dort zurück. Von Glück vertrieben bin ich geblieben und Weib und Kind ob allein. Die Räder drehen sich, die Ohren gehen sich, und elend bin ich wie ein Stein. Hab gehört Sorgen, wer will mich verjagen, a Reus von dort und von der Mühl. Die Räder drehen sich, die Ohren gehen sich, oi ohne Eck und ohne Ziel. Wo will ich weinen, wer wird mich scheunen? Ich bin schon alt, ich bin schon müd. Die Räder drehen sich, die Ohren gehen sich, und euch mit See geht euch der Jid. Die Räder drehen sich, die Ohren gehen sich, und euch mit See geht euch der Jid.
Good evening, all, and thank you so much for joining us at this gathering to remember our friend, our colleague, teacher, student, member of our family, the incomparable David Shneer. I welcome all of you who have joined us from all around the world, abzugeben COVID, to offer tribute to David, and an especially warm welcome to David's family, to Greg, Sasha, Yanai, to Diane, Jim, and Rob Shneer, and all of your families. I'm Rob Adler Peckerar, Executive Director of Yiddishkeit, and David was one of my dearest friends, and he was my closest collaborator. There was not a program I worked on or a piece of writing that I penned that I didn't discuss first with David. And I know for many of you watching tonight, that's also the case. David's interests and passions spanned so many diverse fields that it would just be impossible to address them all in the brief time that we've scheduled tonight. The theme of our tribute to David is guided by David's love of Jewish culture and its complicated twists and turns, his desire to show the revolutionary potential in works of art and document their history in poetry and music in particular. As you all know, David left us a month ago. To some of you, David's illness was a surprise. His continuous positivity and productivity while living for more than 15 years with cancer is a testament not only to David's indefatigable optimistic spirit, but a testament to how David approached and lived his life. For those of you familiar with David's work, particularly with his first groundbreaking history of Soviet Jewish history, you know that tragedy and heartbreak is central to his work. His dissertation, A Revolution in the Making, Yiddish and the Creation of Soviet Jewish Culture, which was later published as Yiddish and the Creation of Soviet Jewish Culture, was deeply influenced by his education at Berkeley, where he was both an undergraduate and graduate student, and where I first met David 22 years ago. Now, underlying this amazing piece of scholarship was an idea that we at Berkeley had come to hold as a central tenet, that the lives and work of the people we study cannot, should not, must not be overwhelmed by the stories of their tragic ends. Whether these incredible producers of Jewish culture met their early deaths at the hands of Stalin's accomplices in murder or in German extermination camps, an end should never determine a life. And this idea spans all of David's work, even his final book, Grief, which I have right here, appears on the surface to be about unthinkable atrocity. It's even on its very cover and in its title. But the story he tells in this book is a story of art, of artists and the work they produce, of the way that grief can be transformed into creativity. And David's work never averts its gaze from the heartbreak, but he points us in another direction to see how beauty and tragedy can exist simultaneously, how the telling of history, as David did so masterfully, needs to be all-encompassing of the human experience, with all of its sadness, its grief, and all its beauty. And it's that very idea that guides us here this evening. While we're heartbroken by David's life cut short and are shaken by the grief of his absence, we devote tonight to celebrating some of the many things that sparked David's passion and his love. We have brought together some incredible people from the worlds of poetry and scholarship and music, all of whom meant a great deal to David. And as you will no doubt see and hear tonight, David meant a great deal to all of them. And I hope all of you out there watching will bear in mind the technical challenge of linking all of our participants together, all taking part in a variety of ways, and forgive any lags in connections or technical glitches or fluctuations in volume, which will inevitably occur along the way. And also, we invite those of you watching on YouTube or Facebook who feel so inclined to share your memories of David in the comments so that they can all be preserved with the recording of tonight's tribute to him. A number of years ago, David and I edited a volume dedicated to the experience of studying Jewish culture at the University of California at Berkeley. It was a Festschrift for our beloved professor, Chana Kronfeld, who we welcome tonight. In David's introduction to this volume, he wrote, "Chana's salon was my intellectual home at Berkeley, where I met the people who would become my lifelong colleagues, teachers, and friends, and where I fell in love with reading. I would go one step further," David wrote. "Chana Kronfeld taught me to read. Of course, it was my parents and kindergarten teacher who taught me to discern individual letters, put them together to make words, and to put those words into sentences as I became literate. But Chana taught me that beneath the pshat, the surface level, lay many complicated layers of history and culture, a pardes, a fruitful expanse of meaning." And David summed it all up. "I think of Chana not only as a Doktormutter, but as my intellectual mother." Welcome, Chana Kronfeld.
Thank you so much, Robbie, for this amazing tribute. And I really feel like a bereaved mother, and my heart goes out to the family. I really want to celebrate that incredible shidduch, that incredible marriage of history, poetry, and music and art that became David's life cut too short. He was diagnosed 15 years ago, right after we lost my beloved husband, Amichai Kronfeld, to the same horrible disease. But as Robbie said, it was never about his suffering. It was always about the incredible revolutionary potential that Jewish art, that poetry, that a real rigorous study of Jewish history can unleash. And I want to just describe in his own words the moment when David discovered Peretz Markish, the wonderful revolutionary avant-garde Soviet Yiddish poet, that he ended up co-editing this amazing book with Gennady Estreich, Jordan Finken, and the late Joseph Sherman. In his introduction to this study of Peretz Markish, a poet who was killed by Stalin, he writes, This is David in 2011. I first discovered, I'm reverting to my Yiddish or Hebrew accent. I first discovered Peretz Markish on a rainy night in Berkeley in 1997 by the hearth of a beautiful haunted Victorian era home. That's a little exaggerated. This isn't the opening of a Gothic novel, but is instead the beginning of a romance with a poet whose legacy had been buried under an avalanche of history. I still remember what we were reading, one of Markish's early modernist poems, Don't Know If I'm at Home, from 1919. We spent hours on each line of poetry. That's probably not exaggerated. A luxurious close reading that turned a challenging poetic credo into a moment of revelation about poetry's power to respond to violence. That night, I fell in love with Markish's poetry, which creates beauty, passion, agony, and pleasure in language that is often excessive, but always embodied and alive. We concluded the evening lamenting how the violence that Markish spent a lifetime responding to caught up to him in a Stalinist prison. But of course, as he and Robbie were going to go on to teach us all, that death, that end does not determine the life. And that goes for the horrible way in which we lost David. I want to just leave you with that wonderful poem by Peretz Markish that we studied that night. I am sitting right now on my couch in that Victorian house. You see, it's not haunted. If anything, it's haunted by the terrible loss of David and by the all unmourned lives that this culture doesn't know how to honor. But I want to read that poem also because there is such an analogy between the revolutionary sweetness and beauty of a poet and a scholar and a singer that everybody fell in love with, men and women, Peretz Markish and David Shneer. So I'll read it first in the Yiddish, in the English translation that Bluma Goldstein and I did many years ago. And it's without rhymes, unfortunately. Don't know if I'm at home or if I'm afar, I'm running. My shirt's unbuttoned. There are no reins on me. I'm nobody's. I'm unclaimed, without a beginning, without an end. My body is foam and it reeks of wind. My name is now. If I throw out my hands, they'd give a world a smack from one end to the other. My eyes, if I let roam about, they'd guzzle down the world from the bottom up. With eyes open, with an unbuttoned shirt, with hands stretched out, I don't know if I have a home or have a far, if I'm a beginning or an end. Weiß ich nicht, ich bin in der Reim, ziehen der Fremd, ich läuf. Zerspielt ist mein Hemd, nicht tos auf mir kein Zäum, ich bin keinems nicht, ich bin Hefker. Ohne Noneb, ohne Sof. Mein Guff ist Schäum und schmeckt von ihm mit Wind, mein Nomen ist Azint. Zerwarf ich meine Hand, der langen sei die Welt von ein Eck bis ins Zweiten. Die Augen schloss gewendet, vertrinken sei die Welt von unten bis herauf. Mit Augen offene, mit a zerspielt Hemd, mit Händ zerspreite, weiß ich nicht, sich oberheim, sich oberfremd, sich bin an Onheib, sie a Sof. Thank you, Tyre David, for the beauty that you brought to this life. Robbie?
Thank you so much, Hannah. And it's just incredible to see you in that place where all of us learned together, sitting on that very sofa where I first read Peretz Markish myself. It's just such a pleasure to hear it and to be taken back there. Thank you so much, Hannah. So many of the individuals who played such an important role in David's life hail from his time at Cal. Of course, it was there that he met the love of his life, later his husband, Greg Drinkwater, famously falling in love while writing the Berkeley Guide to Germany. And also there in Germany at that time, writing the guide section on Berlin, was another person who would become a core part of Dave and Greg's circle of friends, Julia Eisenberg. And since those school days, Julia has become a renowned musician and composer working at the intersection of voice, text, and diaspora consciousness, performing in a variety of incredible projects. Her music is mostly released with John Zorn's Tzaddik label on the Radical Jewish Culture imprint. And tonight she'll bring us two songs with Book of J, which the BBC described as, quote, a wonder of haunted American roots music, taking listeners from Yiddish laments to labor anthems via mystical twists and turns. And she'll perform in a bit with her partner from Book of J, Jeremiah Lockwood, who has also played around the world. He is the leader of the Sway Machinery and the guitarist in the Balkan Beatbox. And Jeremiah is currently completing his PhD on Hasidic cantorial music at Stanford University. But first, let's bring on Julia Eisenberg.
Hey, you guys.
Julia, how are you?
All right.
It's so great to see you here tonight. And I was wondering, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the songs that you have recorded here that we'll play, that you recorded with Book of J, that you've also performed with David.
I will. So we're gonna do two songs that are from the canon of Lin Yaldati, and I'll talk a little bit more about her and David's interest in her and why we kind of did this project, like why it was interesting for both of us and why I remained fascinated by David's interpretation of her continually for that. Like, I'm still fascinated. I wish he would just keep talking about her or just keep talking about anything really. Okay, so two songs. The first song is called Sprent. It's burning. Our village is burning, and it's by Mordechai Gebirtig. So when I say it's by, both these songs are folk songs. So we know the poet. Okay, the first one is Mordechai Gebirtig, and the second one I think is like Chaim. Oh my God, I'm so bad. Robbie, can you check it for me?
I will.
It's for Chavala, Brida Merhavik Mishleslin. So both of them have a poet, like we know the poet, but it gets adopted communally and it gets kind of mapped onto a previous tune, a Russian tune, a Slavic tune. And they become kind of pop hits, both of them, in different ways. So Mordechai Gebirtig, furniture maker and giant of Yiddish folk music. There was a pogrom in a shtetl near Krakow, which is where Gebirtig is from, in 1936, so before the war. And the words of the song take us through the kind of terror and violence of the pogrom. And the apathy of the bystanders is the worst part. In terms of what's happening musically, a thing to keep your ear out for is that David found this really interesting fact, which was that the opening phrase is an echo of the sound of the fire engines in Krakow at that time. So like, da, 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 that sound is the sound of the fire engine. And just a quick something that David said about this. First of all, he said that this was his favorite song that we did together, which is a quite dark song to choose in some ways, but the ending of the song is very positive because instead of like, it says like, don't just sit there, put out the fire, like get up and don't just stand there with your folded hands. So Robbie, should I introduce Chavala now or do you want to play, should we roll tape of Sprent first?
Yeah, let's listen to the whole thing and then you can come back and tell us a little bit more.
No, let me talk about Chavala then. No,
okay.
Let me go backwards. I'll talk about Chavala in a second. Go ahead.
Sounds good.
I'm bored with myself.
Städte brennt. Mit ihr Hosen, reiten brechen, uns bloß. Starke Nacht in wilde Flammen, als schön brennt. Steht und guckt der Säuse mit verlegter Hand. Und ihr steht und guckt der Säuse, unsere Städte lernen. Unsere armen Städte brennt. Oben scheint die Feuerzungen, die ganze Stadt eingeschlungen. Und die Bäse winken huschen, unsere Städte brennt. Und ihr steht und guckt, sei sie mit verlegter Hand. Und ihr steht und sei sie, unsere Stadt brennt. Sie brennt, Brüderlich, sie brennt. Sie kämpfen lille kommende Moment. Unsere Stadt mit uns zusammen soll auf Asch abwecken Flammen, bleiben so wie noch ein Schlag, noch ist der schwarze Mensch. Und die Stunde der Säuse mit verlegter Hand. Und ihr steht und guckt der Säuse, unsere Städte brennt. Brennt, Brüderlich, brennt. Die Hilfe ist nur in euch allein gewählt. Räumt das Städtel in Sachteile, nimmt die Kehle, löscht das Feuer, löscht mit euch eigen Blut, beweist an ihr dort kennt. Steht nicht Brüder, das soll sich mit verlegter Hand. Steht nicht Brüder, löscht das Feuer, unser Städtel brennt. Säune dem Hitz. Dann zog ich auf meine Hand von dem Feuer und ich hält dir mit Kisteiner Wind. Dann zog ich auf meine Hand von dem Feuer und ich hält dir mit Kisteiner Wind. Wir stehen beiden Wegen Osten, die Sohnen, die Reuter in Hand. Wir stehen beiden Wegen Osten, die Sohnen, die Reuter in
So that second song that we just heard is called Chavla, or it's also called Brüder, wir haben geschlossen, brothers, we have vowed, and it's the same song, but it was kept. It was kept by two different communities. It was kept by Bundists, who were mostly men doing it in meetings. So it was like like pretty didactic and a lot like Shua and like heavy in vibe and march tempo. And it was also kept by women, where it was sung like ballad style, so that you are free from meter, and like actually names women in it. So like Havala or Hanala or Gniesla, or that you have a lot of Bergovsky collected many versions of this song as sung by women. And Linyal Dati sung it kind of the more austere, dogmatic way. But we decided to do a combination. And I just wanted to give a shout out to David's red shoes. And like, it's always exciting to, like, if you grew up a communist like me, then it's always exciting when people like really enjoy wearing red. So that was just like always a high point for me. And that's something I was thinking about when I see a red dress. I think about David's red shoes. Okay. I want to say a quick word about, I want to keep an eye on the time also. I want to say a quick word about Art is My Weapon, which is these songs come out of the canon of the singer Linyal Dati. And if you're familiar with David's recent work, then you know that Linyal Dati was a red diva of Yiddish song. And David describes her as a global Yiddish singing sensation from when she first started working as a cabaret singer in the Netherlands in the 30s until her death in 1988. And at first he was interested in this because it was like he got to think about like the relationship of German, because East Germany is in a very particular place, and it's like the specificity of the like their relationship between commemoration and Holocaust commemoration and war crimes, and so that's remained interesting the entire time. But it also was constantly dancing around this idea that Hannah and Robbie both already touched on, which is that David was interested in expressions of revolutionary possibility. And that's what, like, expressions of revolutionary possibility and their constraints. So, and that's a lot of what Linyal Dati's life and work is about that tension. And this kind of issues around authenticity and agency in like harsh statist contexts. But there's also like all this fabulous queer stuff in it. And like, he's just on the front of everything, it is gender fabulation. And she had it like really going on in the beginning of her career. And then like, what happens to it towards the end? And what does his queer aesthetic mean when we understand like David as a queer scholar and like thinking about music and art and photography, like with all of these like from like a queer theory setup, like what does it mean to think about him as like a queer aesthete? I don't know. It's something that I'm thinking about a lot for this project right now, that I'm still thinking about. I just want to, before I introduce Yalda, which I think I need to do in like 10 seconds, I wanted to say that David could have, I mean, this book is coming out, and David could have, he published tons, he put a small book on this already in German, and also he has published many articles on this and done lots of talks on this and stuff. He could have done anything with this, but what he decided was, what he said was that he was transformed during the Helix trip. He was transformed by how singing made him feel different about what he was studying. And so he really wanted to get into this investigation of text via bodily expression, and that was important to him. And I want to just give mad props to that, because you just don't see that. No one's doing that, and that's just so awesome. It's just so awesome. And just closing that idea is he was a public intellectual who believed in anti-fascism, and like that's not something to be taken for granted. You know, I was with him during not this past election, federal election, but the last one, and we, you know, it was like he was a dedicant. He was fighting for the revolution, and he understood the connections between Lyn Yaldaty's career making anti-fascist music and connecting it to these deep veins of anti-authoritarianism within Yiddish culture, so that you're looking for these deep roots that go down, looking for how those roots are connected to us today. Okay, let me introduce Yalda. I'm barely holding this together, so let me just take a second. Okay, so whenever we would perform this music, David would always start by how he discovered the story of Lyn Yaldaty, and he discovered it through Greg. So Greg is David's husband, and Greg was thinking about a career in the Renewal Rabbinate, and they were in Berlin, and so he got an invitation to the house of the Renewal cantor in Berlin. So, and that woman's name is Yalda Raebling. And so they were over there, and David just kind of casually asked her how she wanted to become a cantor, and she said, well, I was the star of the East German Yiddish theater. And from there, it was like queer serendipity, like, you know, it was like the rest of like, you know, next book is plotted, you know. So that's, I have never met Yalda in person, and I can't stand it that this is how that we're going to meet now. But let me tell you that there's a lot to know and to appreciate about Yalda. She is an actress. She is a singer. She is a specialist in medieval Jewish music. She has like a dozen albums to her name. And I just want to, we're about to go over to you, Yalda, and I want to tell you that it's good to finally meet you.
Hello, I'm Yalda Raebling from Berlin, and I'm not able to join you tonight because I'm at the other side of the world. It is in the middle of the night for me. I'm very sorry for that, because I hope you will make a recording and I can listen to all these other voices who are remembering David Shneer, Alav Sholem. We met David many years ago. It was in Berlin, and it was one of those meetings. You know, Chaim Janke and Yankel Chaim are coming to Berlin, and you definitely have to meet them. So we set up a dinner in the studio of my wife, Anna Adam, and we met these very nice two young men, and it came out they are two daddies and we were two mummies, so we had already a lot in common. And during our talk, I shared that I grew up in East Berlin and with Yiddish songs. And I told David about our Yiddish festivals, and I told David about Lyn Yaldaty, my mom, who was a famous Yiddish singer, not only in East Germany, but around Europe. And he never had heard about it. I said, wait a minute, Yiddish in East Germany, I want to know more. And he started his journey to search the story of Linyal Dati and her passion for Yiddish. As our David was a Yiddishist, also my mama was a Yiddishist. And so David found a lot about her. And yeah, he was just writing the book about Linyal Dati, and it is unfinished. And I'm sure that someone will finish this task, not only for my mom, not only for Linyal Dati, but also for David's heritage, what he was teaching his students. Go to look carefully, have another view on the situation. It's always different than it seems. Look carefully, look deeper, ask. And that's why I hope we can fulfill this work of David, and I'm happy to help whoever will do this work. David, we are missing you. We are missing you very much as a scholar, as a teacher, as a friend. And your love will stay in this world as Ahava always is staying in this world. And I'm sure that the passion you shared with so many students will move on in this world, and you made the world a better place. And I'm sure that Yiddish will live in your memory. Schockelt die gelocktes grünes Käpple, mein weiß in Gebrioskele und Abend ohne Schier. Jedes Blätterle ist tschatschet still at Wille, sei schon klein Brioskele, mis Hallilo ich mir. Sei schon klein Berioskele, mis Hallilo ich mir.
Hi everyone, my name is Moriel Rothman-Zecker. I'm a novelist and poet, and I had the privilege of traveling with and going for morning runs with and laughing with and learning so much from David in Belarus and Lithuania last summer, in the summer of 2019. And I want to read two short poems today in David's memory. The first is a piece called Poetry by Avram Sutzkever. And I was reminded of David's brilliance, his precision, and his grace when reading this piece. Poesie. A dunkel violette Fläum, die letzte Eufenbäum. Dien heitlich und zart wie Schwarzappel, was hat bei Nacht den Toi geloschen, Liebe, Sehung, Zappel. Und mit den Morgenstern in der Toi geworden Gringer, das ist Poesie. Rier sie, ohne Zoi. Men soll nicht sehen, kein Simmen von die Finger. Poetry. The last dark violet plum on the tree, delicate and tender as the pupil of an eye, blots out in the dewy night all love, visions, trembling, and at the morning star the dew becomes airier. That's poetry. Touch it without letting it show the print of your fingers. And the second piece is a Yiddish translation of a poem by Langston Hughes. And I thought of this piece because one of the last correspondences David and I had was actually about Langston Hughes' visit to Moscow in the early 1930s. And so this one came to mind. Ich hab lieb gehabt, mein Feind, und hat mich verlassen. Nicht da mehr was zu reden, sendigt sich das Lied, So wie es hat sich angefangen. Ich hab lieb gehabt, mein Freund. I loved my friend. He went away from me. There's nothing more to say. The poem ends soft as it began. I loved my friend.
I'm Alicia Spiegels. Pianist Uli Geisendorfer and I, along with Dr. Yonatan Malin, collaborated on a project at David's wonderful Archive Transformed residency, which is where Uli and I first met David. He was a dear, sweet person and brilliant, and he clearly delighted in bringing people together. Here is a piece called Coming Back to Earth, which we created at Archive Transformed and dedicate now to David's memory.
so much, Yalda, Moriel, Uli, and Alicia. In 2004, when I was charged with creating new educational programs at the Yiddish Book Center, the very first person I called to join the faculty of our prospective new program was, of course, David Shneer. When I was putting together a new type of traveling immersion in Yiddish literature and history across Eastern Europe for the Book Center called the Literatur, of course, I called David. And from that point on, he maintained a long-standing relationship with the Book Center, where he inspired countless students, many of whom have gone on to stellar careers themselves in Jewish culture and history. So now I'd like to welcome a man who needs no introduction, really, the founder and president of the Yiddish Book Center, Aaron Lansky.
Thanks, Robbie.
It's good to see you, Aaron.
Good to see you too. Should I jump right in?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks so much for being here, and thanks to the Yiddish Book Center for co-hosting this tonight with us.
Of course, totally our honor. I'm glad we can do it. Well, I'll tell you, my own relationship with David really kind of began with a calamity of sorts. We had been collecting Yiddish books for years. They were stored in a 19th century mill building, and eventually the piles got higher and higher and higher until I finally got a call from the landlord who said that we had cracked one of the gigantic beams that held up the floor, and he was going to evict us. And he gave us a few weeks to get everything sorted out and to get the pile dealt with. I thought, who in the world is going to go into a 90-degree warehouse in the middle of the summer? And we thought, college students. So we started a program for college students, brought them in to try to sort all this out. And we taught them the Hebrew alphabet, the Yiddish alphabet. But it turned out it wasn't nearly enough. One day before I left, I had set up palettes of the most popular writers, Shalom Aleichem and Peretz and Raisin and Gida Maupassant in translation. I came back and I told the students just put the box, the books on their respective palettes. I came back and the students were all excited. I said, "What's up? What's up?" And they said, "Well, we found a writer you've never even heard about, and he wrote more than all the rest of them combined." I said, "Really? Who is it?" And they said, "Some guy named Gesammelte Schriften," which of course means collected works. At that point, I realized that we had to start teaching in earnest. So we started an hour a day of Yiddish language instruction. That went on for a while until Robbie arrived. When Robbie got there, he persuaded us that education shouldn't just be a Nachschlepper for the actual schlepping, but that it should really be the focus of the program. We ended up forming what we call the Steiner Summer Yiddish program. Robbie expanded it from 5 students to 20. We started offering Yiddish classes at different levels. And as Robbie just said, he made the strong case that it wasn't enough just to teach language. We had to contextualize it by teaching Jewish history and culture as well. And that was when we turned to David Shneer. David ended up teaching for many years at the center. He eventually served as the program's director. When I think back at David, about David, I have this one image that keeps coming to mind. It was the summer when David arranged a field trip for all of our students and took them to Borough Park, a Hasidic neighborhood in Brooklyn. I'll never forget, I went over there with my daughter. We ran down the subway stairs, and out on the street, there's David standing there, surrounded by all these young people, by all these students, a kind of Pied Piper with his infectious smile and his exuberance and his love of teaching. I remember I once read a story about a young British woman who on successive nights dined with both Disraeli and Gladstone. Later, a friend asked her for her impressions. She said, when I was with Gladstone, I thought he was the cleverest person in all of England. But when I was with Disraeli, I felt that I was the cleverest person in all of England. I think many of David's students felt exactly the same way. David was certainly clever and with a remarkable range of subject matter, but he was decidedly of the Disraeli camp. He didn't just share his erudition with his students, he brought out the best in them. It's in that spirit that I want to share tributes from 3 of David's fellow faculty members in the Steiner Summer Yiddish program. The first is Josh Lambert, who was with us for 10 years as our academic director. Josh described a time when David was giving a lecture at the Medem Bibliothèque in Paris. And he said the translator was struggling and the audience kept correcting him. And it became clear, collecting the translator, and it became clear that almost everyone in the room understood English, in fact, and didn't really need a translator. And as Josh writes, it was all kind of ridiculous. But David didn't do what 99% of the academics I know, including myself, would have done in his place, which is to get flustered. He rolled with it, made jokes in English and French and Yiddish, put everyone at ease, and gave a terrific lecture. He was such a class act and so incredibly kind to me. I miss him so much. Second is Rivka Margolis, another long-standing teacher and a brilliant scholar. She writes, David recruited me to teach in the Steiner program in 2010. It was instrumental in my establishing the lasting connection with the Yiddish Book Center that has been so, hold on here, so important to me personally and professionally. She said, I always looked forward to collaborating with David around pedagogy and spending time with him in the valley around Amherst. I remember time with him always being laughter-filled and lively, how the students both admired and adored him, how he made everything, even the most tedious situations, adventurous and fun. He was an innovator and a visionary, and his family was his bedrock and his inspiration. Our little Yiddish world is so greatly diminished without David in it. May he have a bright spot in the Garden of Eden. And last is Justin Cammey, who wrote, David's visionary creativity ensured that Yiddish language learning was embedded in deep cultural literacy at Steiner. What a joy it was to welcome him summer after summer to the Pioneer Valley, where his smile warmed summer evenings and drinks on the porch extended into late evening. His enthusiasm energized us all and will continue to inspire us all. And so it does, and so it always will. Zichroina Levrocha, may his memory be a blessing for us all. And with that, it's my honor to introduce one of David's students and later his teaching assistant and colleague, the present academic director of the Yiddish Book Center, Mindl Cohen.
Thank you so much, Aaron. It's true. So I met David the very first summer that I started learning Yiddish. That was in 2006 at the Steiner Summer Yiddish program. So probably his second year there with Robbie. And the memory of that time of him that sticks in my mind most closely was sitting in this U-shaped seminar room upstairs in the Yiddish Book Center, where probably many people here have also sat. And David didn't sit at the front of the room. He didn't sit at the table with us. He kind of perched on a stool right in the center of the classroom, swiveling around, looking at people. And of course, that was the summer that I caught the Yiddish bug, as they say, maybe a wrong metaphor to use during our current times. I re-encountered David's work then later in graduate school in a seminar with Chana Kronfeld, who we heard from at the beginning of this program on Soviet Yiddish literature. And through my work with Chana and with Robbie, I ended up writing about a Soviet Yiddish poet called Izzy Harik, who David had discussed in his work that we've heard about this evening, the book Yiddish and the Creation of Soviet Jewish Culture. That book contained a chapter on this Belarusian Soviet Yiddish poet, Izzy Harik, and it included a discussion of one of his long poemas that I then ended up writing about and translating in full for my dissertation. And you know, the engagement with David's scholarship of Harik and of that work, I couldn't have done my own research without it. And one of the things that was so important about David's work was not just what I learned about Harik and the rarity of having this serious scholarly engagement with this poet in English, but it was how David read, right? That though that book is a work of cultural history, it includes translations and close readings of poetry. And that was really a model for my own scholarship coming from the literary side, that we have to work in interdisciplinary ways. And that was just kind of the most textual example, you know, of David's interdisciplinarity, which we've heard expands in so many other ways into embodied performance and practice. And so it occurred to me, you know, thinking about what I would say tonight, that I think one of the core things that draws me to the study of early Soviet Yiddish culture must be one of the things that drew David as well. And that is that in that work, we find a political practice that is embodied in poetics and enacted through poetics, and a poetic practice that's also embodied in politics and enacted through politics. And that's something that David studied and that I studied, but that David also lived, right? That we see that through his creative endeavors and his inspiration of other creative endeavors. In 2015, I had a really special opportunity to participate as faculty in the Helix Fellowship the same year that David also participated. And we traveled to Minsk, as that program always does. So we were able to read some of this translation I had done of Izzy Harik's poema in Minsk with our students. And it was so special to be reading and showing and teaching this material alongside the scholar and the teacher who had given me access to it. So what I want to do is read a short excerpt, one section of this long poema called Minsker Blottes, which I've translated as Minsk Muck. So I'm going to read one section in English, and I'll just end with one stanza of the Yiddish original. The sky is quiet, a chill is on the tin, every forehead starry damp and still. Carrying over the rooftops is an evening hymn, every heart echoes the rich thrill. Worked all day long, into the night and since the dawn, sitting now on the tin roofs tired, Uncle Pina sings his nephew Pina every evening, every night, a song. Today they live in snow and chains. Today they are so far away. Oh, but what a time that was. Feverish in the workshops we awoke. Strikes and blood and the Marseillaise. But what do you know, kid? Think it's some joke? In a burning rush, they took those men, shipped off to Siberia, all of them. When, oh, when will we take down that czar? Whatever it takes, break down that door. Bring those brothers back where they belong. Fetch them home, the whole lot. Every evening, Uncle Pina sings these songs. Every evening, the roof gets lost in thought. Un gring, un gich, a nemton, jene brider. Gring un gich, a trogton bis a her. Jeden Abend singt der Vetter Pina Lieder. Jeden Abend wird der Dach verquert.
Mindl, it's such an incredible pleasure to hear you read that. I mean, I've heard you read it in the Minsk mud, so with David at our side. So it's just an incredible thing to hear. And I was just thinking while you were reading that, just what it was like to sit next to you on a bus in Belarus and listen to David hold forth for almost hours at a time, telling the history of that region while we drove through it, you know?
That was one of my, that's one of my enduring memories of Helix, and certainly will be one of my enduring memories of David, that we spend all this time traveling, right? And one morning, probably the second morning, he woke up and said, like, so should I give spontaneous lectures on the entire history of Jews in Eastern Europe while we're on the bus? Said, okay, and he did, and he like divided it into perfect sections. Yeah.
It was incredible. And then also just like remembering back to 2006 and seeing you as a student of David and having that experience of being at the Steiner summer, the very first years of that together, and seeing how it's taken you on this incredible journey in Yiddish is an incredible thing to see. I think I'd love to bring on another alumnus of the summer program, who's Nick Underwood, who is, like so many students of David, like you too, has David inspired to pursue interest in the cultural history of radical politics, this embodiment that Mindl so beautifully talked about. Nick eventually came to the University of Colorado at Boulder, where he completed his doctorate in modern European Jewish history in 2016. And there, David was his Doktorvater, his PhD advisor. So let's bring in Nick.
Hi.
Hey, Nick, it's great to see you.
Good. I'm trying to get lined up here.
Hi, Nick.
Hi, how are you?
Nick, it's great. I just wanted to tell people that you're currently the assistant professor of history at and chair of Judaic studies at the College of Idaho, and that you work on Yiddish culture in 20th century France. And you have a forthcoming book coming out about the intersections between diaspora nationalism and Jewish immigration and anti-fascism. And that I believe you have a special issue that you co-edited of a journal that's coming out of fascism on the topic of the global cultures of anti-fascism, coming out, I think this week, you said.
I think
dedicated to David's memory. So it's great to have you here and have all of us here together.
Thank you. It's great to see you, Robbie. It's great to see you too, Mindl.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
It reminds me of another connection and these wonderful relationships that David helps build, that Nick and David and Anna Sternschis, who we'll hear, were among the editors who helped me bring out my very first peer-reviewed article just this year.
And one of the things that also I feel like connects the two of you is that I love the way that David always encouraged people to bring their full selves into what they do, especially into the study of culture, but also to be performers of culture, which the two of you do beautifully. And I'd love just to turn to Nick, because I believe Nick is going to perform for us tonight.
I am going to. Yeah. Thank you, Robbie. And Mindl, again, it was great to see you. So David always encouraged his students to bring their own artistic passions into the classroom, and that always spoke to me. It was actually music that first brought me physically to Europe many, many years ago, and it was also music that inspired me to take my first history courses as an undergrad in history. I'm going to play a song right now that I did not write. It's a song called Engine, and I think this song reminds me about the connections I made with David. He helped me carve out a life where I could travel and research in Europe and write, edit, revise, and also helped me and my family figure out a way that we can do it while we were able to start a family. The complications with that, but yet still having and wanting to foster this kind of love of travel and research. So I'd like to sing the song. It speaks to all of those aspects of our relationship and how he really put me on that path. In a past life, I used to play music and sing songs like I mentioned, and I don't think I've played a song in front of people in probably 10 years. So I figured the internet streaming was the best way to make a reappearance in this form. So I'm going to unplug my headphones now, and I'm going to sing a song. For I am an engine that I'm rolling through endless revisions to state what I mean. The sweetness alone flew out of the window and landed back home. Garden of green. You're riding alone in back of a steamer and seeing yourself before the shower spray and water all on the round cabin's belly. We're talking to tigers from his cafeteria tray. As those sweet babies fall away. Thanks. That was fun. So I now have the pleasure of introducing the next person that you're going to hear from, and it's really an honor to be able to introduce this person. They'll be singing a song that actually connects some to my own research and anti-fascism and radical Yiddish culture to a lot of what David did, both kind of intellectually, but also there's a spatial connection, which is that this is a song that Soy Korolenko is going to sing by David Edelstadt, who is buried in Denver, Colorado. So it's a pleasure to introduce this clip that Soy filmed and recorded specifically for this meeting this evening. So roll clip.
O gute Freund, wenn ich will sterben, trag zu mein Käfer unser Fond, die freie Fond mit reute Farb, verspritzt mit Blut von Arbeitsmann, die freie Fond mit reute Farb, verspritzt mit Blut von Arbeitsmann. Und dort unter der Fahne der Reuter singt mir mein Lied, mein freie Lied, mein Lied in Kampf, was klingt wie Keiten von dem versklavten Christonit, mein Lied in Kampf, was klingt wie Keiten von dem versklavten Christonit. Euch und mein Käfer will ich hören, mein freie Lied, mein sturem Lied, euch dort will ich vergießen Tränen, vor dem versklavten Christonit, euch dort will ich vergießen Tränen, vor dem versklavten Christonit. Und wenn ich hör die Schwerten klingen in letzten Schlacht von Blut und Schwarz, zum Volk will ich von Käfer singen und will begeistern sein Herz. Zum Volk will ich von Käfer singen und will begeistern sein Herz.
Yeah, thanks for sharing this. It was quite important to sing this song because from what I know about David and his world, his outlook, I think he'd love me to sing, but my personal encounter with David takes place mostly in, so to say, academic, artistic fields, such as Yiddish Glory, sharing stage with Julie and David performing Lineal Dati song. So I think that he'd love me to sing this precious song that thematized the idea of continuity and which itself embodies a very important continuity, or is it contiguity? Why don't we say the gold chain that stretches from the European 19th century's communar song, international, deeply international and high classic in its origins, to Yiddish worker movement song, which is music and poetry, democratic, appealing zum Volk, zum der versklavten Christonit, and at the same time quite subtle and sophisticated, to Soviet popular songs that did influence amateur authors of Yiddish Glory songs collected by Bergovsky, and to European political cabaret that influenced and inspired Lineal Dati. So it's a great song by a great poet and composer, the bard, the soul of Yiddish progressive heritage, and
David's namesake.
Yes. Hi, my name is Anna Stansches, and I'm very honored to be part of this commemoration. And thank you, Pasha, for this beautiful performance, and also for explaining why we chose this song. In fact, we spent some time thinking what we should do, what song we should sing. Well, Pasha should sing for David. You know, when Robbie approached us initially, he asked us to sing something from the Yiddish Glory Project, and we were tempted because David and I spoke a lot about Yiddish Glory Project, and as Pasha said, we shared the stage with him and Julia Eisenberg, performing it twice, and we decided at the end that we should indeed choose this David Edelstadt song. And the reason that we knew that David loved this poet, and we saw on Facebook a photograph where he and Julia are standing next to the grave of David Edelstadt, and also the fact that David Edelstadt, as Pasha said, called for justice and for seeing those who the world refuses to acknowledge. And this is very much determines and this is what we think about when we think about David Shneer. So when I was thinking what to say at this forum about David, I want to focus on the side of him that a lot of people covered now, and that is his academic research, which went beyond his books and conferences, and experimenting with singing. David sang beautifully on stage. He dared to sing on stage, and I remember, because we work on similar projects, lecture art and the lecture concert, and I remember discussing whether or not the historian should sing, and I gave up after a few attempts, but David said, no, I love it. And he says, this brings me joy. And he says, this is so much more joyful to sing on stage than to do so many other things as we academics have to do. And he just went with it with incredible results. David was fluent in many languages, in Hebrew, German, Russian, which he spoke almost without any accent, and of course Yiddish. He was not a Yiddishist per se, so he didn't speak Yiddish much, at least to his friends, but he made Yiddish, I don't know, as they say, cool and relevant for generations of students, taking them to Europe, engaging in Yiddish scholarship himself, and he could have chosen any language, but he didn't. With his enthusiasm, excitement, and support, elevated Yiddish, and specifically Soviet Yiddish, which inspired others to be inspired by it as well. And David's support for ideals of justice, left, socialist movement, gay rights, all these things were connected to Yiddish for him. People often talk actually about his role in advocating for gay rights and gay activism, but I also want to say that he, unlike no other scholar that I know born in the United States, promoted and helped people who speak with an accent, Russian, Polish, German academics, often working on exciting topics, but who couldn't get heard or couldn't get anywhere because of cultural differences or accented English or lack of knowledge of cultural norms. He saw beyond all that. He saw the spark, and he promoted that spark wherever he could. I myself learned so much from him about being direct, but also diplomatic. In fact, my husband often tells me, why can't you be more like David Shneer, to say what you think, but don't insult people when you say what you think. David taught me how to at least think about that, how to start difficult letters with this phrase, which I learned from him, which I use now all the time. I'm both terrified and excited to write back. It saved me so many times. We edited this journal together, East European Jewish Affairs, and worked closely with Nick Underwood, who he adored and admired, and so do I. And it always amazed me with David how he saw diamonds through any barrier. He saw people through all their writing, with mistakes, with difficult to find argument, and people saw him too. So many students, colleagues, friends are heartbroken because they will miss that. And I think I would speak for a lot of people when I say that we will spend our lives aspiring to be like David and trying to make a fraction of difference that he made. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you both so much for being here tonight. It's so great to see the two of you. I have such a strong memory of the two of you, Basha and Anna, performing on stage the first time David sang. And, I sometimes feel a little responsible for pushing David to singing as part of his academic practice. And that moment where you all sang on stage, and I think Anna, you brought your guitar, and there was this moment where all the people in the audience of the AJS were thinking, are these serious academics actually singing and playing music? And it just became a part of the practice, like Mindl had talked about embodying the material in this new way. And I thank you both so much for being here tonight. Thank
But
you, Anna. Thank you, Pasha.
Also, like, David never took himself too seriously. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
So there's a lot of lightness that goes with doing things like that. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Philip.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. And Achron Chovev, it's a great privilege tonight to welcome our final live performance of the evening. David took great pleasure in being the academic advisor for Yiddishkeit's Artist and Scholars Fellowship that you've heard a bit about tonight. And he was involved in it since its very inception. And one of our 2016-2017 fellows was Anthony Russell. Now, he's based in the Boston area. Anthony is an acclaimed bass baritone, a composer and arranger specializing in Yiddish song. And in his work, Anthony has explored the intersection of traditional Ashkenazic musical forms with his own roots, which resulted in the incredible album Convergence. Anthony is also part of the acclaimed duo Zwei Brüder, and he has performed on stages throughout the world. So welcome, Anthony Russell.
Thank you, Robbie. Tonight, I am going to sing a poem by Soviet Yiddish poet Izzy Charek, a subject of David's scholarship. Set to a folk tune, this is a lullaby that is simultaneously an embrace and a letting go, sung Lekovid David, in honor of my memory of David as someone who was erudite and knowledgeable in his presence, but who wore that erudition so lightly. Sie's kein breiten Stur nit noch, schlaf mein Kind, mein Schneis. Ken noch kitzner dir nit singen, von Hoffen was reift. Ich kenn noch kitzner dir nit singen, von Hoffen was reift. Lulu, Lulu, schlaf. Du wirst wachsen, du musst wachsen, mitten Wuchs von Bein. Schwer mi wird sein dein Haver, fette dein Hein. Schwer mi wird sein dein Haver, fette dein Hein. Lulu, Lulu, schlaf. Wenn's wird werden, wie min sorgt uns, gring auf Godred. Sollst du wissen, als dein Mamen ist gewesen schwer. Sollst du wissen, als dein Mamen ist gewesen schwer. Lulu, Lulu.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Absolutely beautiful. And thank you to everyone who has been a part of this tribute to David tonight. And special thanks to everyone behind the scenes who made all of it possible, to Claire Fester, Lisa Grissom, and Tomek Adler. And as we reach the end of our program, I'm all too aware that there is one voice that we have missed hearing tonight. And it's a voice that we all miss terribly. And so tonight, we'll close with David. If you never saw David in the classroom or heard his beautiful singing voice, and even for those of you who have, here's a video that I made of my friend teaching. We had found ourselves at a reconstructed old mill on the shores of a lake in Belarus. And as you'll hear the roar of the water rushing off the turning mill wheel into the mill pond can sometimes be a little deafening. So I hope you'll forgive the audio. But it was here that David chose to teach one of his favorite Yiddish songs, Den Miller's Tränen, the Miller's Tears, whose final verse reads, Die Räder drehen sich, die Joren gehen sich, und ich mit sie geht durch der Jid. The wheels roll on, the years flow on, and with them too, I pass away. Good night, everybody, and seid mir alle gesund.
Okay. For your in the milk of the day and there, people in day and there, join us.